put out the warrant, are they guaranteed with any kind of funds?
No, that's not.
They're trying to collect it. Not that. We went all they charged, yeah,
They should have made a quicker study like Texas Highway. They would have got their money quicker.
their friends gonna come around and draft it, that's all I was trying to put money out of it. Oh yeah, they already made an effort, just like the Ukraine. What we call this. Are we back on tape now?
We're ready for let's see what I got. But if that changed, if that has changed, that really there isn't a fight going on here, and I think if Elvick is going to start to charge the messenger, here we go again. It sounds like he wants to charge the messenger, and the messenger again is the vulnerable element. And that's just going to put you right back again where you started.
Well, we have been observing most of this summer, last 3 months, that Elvick goes between doing incredibly burden stuff, trying to settle things, and then going right back again on charges in violation of James 411 against his brother. So he keeps bouncing back and forth between peace war. And I can't help but believe that maybe he was singled out by the Father in heaven, not by the people on earth, because Elvick himself has made the statement that it's the Father in heaven that's in control of these governments.
He did make that.
So if he has been drafted by the government, it was under the authority of the Father in heaven. I cannot help but think that the Father is trying to bring Elvick to a higher state of response and understanding what's going on because of his insistence of being on both sides of the mirror at the same time in these activities. So we'll have to see where he's going to go.
It is very interesting to watch his performance, and that he's trying to go low, but if he is not accepted in that position, he immediately starts to charge. And what he's trying to, it looked to me like he was trying to receive a reward for what he was doing. He was trying to get a reward for being impoverished, for going low.
Right. It's kind of like
recognition and reward for this, and that just doesn't compute.
Yeah. It's like saying, okay, I've been nailed on the cross now for 30 minutes. Why hasn't anybody come running forward and thrown flowers at my feet?
There you go. Exactly.
And if you guys don't show up in the next half hour, I'm going to come down and beat some butt.
Yeah.
That's about what it's doing. You know, that's why I said earlier when I reported on this case where a guy was sentenced, and after he was sentenced, it could have gone either way, out or in, whatever. He did not just stop doing things, but he's remained in honor and moved toward more settlement. He's forgiven everybody on the public side for everything anyone on the public side ever did, realizing that he is in charge of his own destiny. And the only reason he may or may not be in custody was because of the actions involving him, not the actions involving the state of Ohio putting out an indictment or anything else. I'm here because of me and my father who wants to teach me a lesson, and I want to help learn to settle this. Well, if this guy would have waited 30 days and said, that's it, you've had your chance. Now I'm coming after you because you guys are in dishonor. What part of truly meaning that you can put the weight on my shoulders as the creditor, aren't you serious about it? After 30 days you go, that's it, I'm done being a creditor. Screw you guys. You guys are going to be responsible now because you didn't respond to me quick enough.
And this is the point I have to make with a lot of people who call me about the dishonor. And when they say, well, I want to show them that court has a dishonor on them. Well, that dishonor really is nothing more than, it's not a position. It is not a charge. It's only evidence of a failure to respond. And they go, it's not a charge. It's not an Excalibur. It is just a way of third-party recognition that they failed to respond under these terms. And that you can go forward with it in an evidential procedure. And all of a sudden it gets real quiet and they're going, oh, what good is the dishonor then? If you're not going to use the dishonor as an evidence and request from the closure and then request your time to settle because you have gone off and tried to make right with your brother before you go to the judge. If you can't bring that evidence in, the judge is going to say, so let me hear you testify. And then you're going to go in and testify and you're going to create a whole new set of charges against you. So when I go through it, and I see that Albert has been flipping a little bit, but it sort of sounds to me that he is venting. It's almost like a venting. He hasn't done that, but he wants to vent. And in venting, he's looking for a release of his anger. And I'm hoping that, since he seems to have a grasp, that he can control that and just continue to vent in this way, but work it as the procedure that he had started. And that was very good. Matter of fact, I encourage people when they're talking, I just go, oh, go ahead, keep going. Vent, just keep going. Matter of fact, I'll give you 2 minutes, of time on the phone. And then 2 minutes, you got 2 minutes to vent. Oh, I just want to say one thought like this. Go. And after that, we'll be, knocking 2 minutes off the hill. Now, you want to come back to me when you work out the solution, and then we'll start to talk about the implementation, and then we'll wait a minute, help me out, then we'll start going through it. But they need that venting, and I'm hoping that's what Albert is doing. And don't let that venting turn into, that's my story and I'm going to tell it. And I want to reward on that. Yeah, I want to go to poverty and I want to be rewarded for that. Okay?
When you said, when the judge asked you, you explained the PR, how should you answer to that? Because I don't have to fight for it. Well, you do not want to come back and preach to the court. Ask a question. Are you saying that a recognizance for this matter is not warranted in this action? Is it possible to get liberty to prepare for the case without putting up a recognizance? Is this matter outside the jurisdiction of admiralty such that a recognizance is not warranted? Could be a lot of different questions. That might tend to be too close to reality and truth, that they may not like that one, but certainly there's a lot of questions. The judge will you understand by the quality of the question you've asked him in return. Okay? Yes, Joe?
With regards to public venting, I don't believe that at all. I believe public is asking for help. He's already told you that he's so worn down that he can't even stand at the podium. He had to sit. I think public is being worked on.
Now the thing. So,
I can't live out now.
well, the whole issue is, the same thing is true when you go back into the Old Testament scripture and look at what was happening to Jacob at Peniel. He didn't win until he was worn out and gave up fighting. And so if Elvick is worn out and gives up fighting, that's the best thing that could happen to him. Because now he should get his remedy if he is of the right attitude. Yes?
I have a little tidbit that just by me last week. I've known a judge in Akron for a number of years, not real close, because she won't let anybody get close to her. She's a little anywhere else. And I was talking with a friend's family just last week, and they had gone to visit her with her elderly mother, and she's taken care of. And the elderly mother says, well, she comes home, she eats, and she does nothing but go to her room with all of her folders and studies her cases on my own to get ready for the next day. So they do know what's in those files.
Oh, yes, they do. So, paragraph. Understand this, at any time in any of these things I read from Elvick, was he discussing the merits of the case? Was he looking forward to the trial at which he was going to defend himself? No. Now, there's going to be those people that certainly are of the mindset of that letter that I read from the Brown website at the beginning of the evening, that are going to say, well, why can't Elvick go into the trial and prove himself innocent? Answer to that, it's on the public side. Everything that was said in that write-up is absolutely true. There is no remedy on the public side. You cannot argue the case and win. The movie that is coming up this fall, that another month or so at the theater, is called Runaway Jury. And in the previews for that movie, one of the lead characters working behind the scenes to investigate the jurors makes a statement: trials are too important to be left in the hands of the jury. That may upset a lot of people, but the jury and the trial are irrelevant. The decision has already been made. And so you can either understand what's going on and know the way we're playing the game here, and then get with it by playing the game in honor, or else you're living in the land of illusion and Looney Tunes, and you're never going to understand what's happening. And you will bitch like blood about the public officials, the court system, the lawyers, the judges, and the politics until the day you die. It is irrelevant and immaterial in this society today. It has nothing to do with the facts. Now, saying that, in some respects, it has everything to do with the facts, because why is it that Elvick believes he was arrested? The 8300 forms, the whistleblower forms. Had he not filed those, could they have allegedly drummed up a proceedings on him? Well, they may have gone to some other obscure thing, but in reality, the start of this transaction was based on 8300 forms, which was an act or an action carried out by the living man. Now, what is wrong with that 8300 form filing act or action? It charges your brother. It's a violation of James 4:11. So he did an act of war, he violated the law by doing an act of war, and now he's been charged. Now, Elvick himself, I think it was in the material I read you because there was a lot that I didn't read, Elvick himself said that when the prosecutor and the judge were discussing things, it was appearing that what they were trying to do is set up the accounts. And Elvick realizes that it has nothing to do with what he did, the 8300 action. That was the cause of an alleged charge, but now that there is a commercial process going down, the court doesn't care about the fact that he did an 8300. What the court cares about is how is he going to respond to the process of bringing the 8300s against him. How is he going to respond to that? If he continues acts of terrorism, warfare, and aggression, he will be punished based on his proceedings of warfare, terrorism, and aggression, which is an extension of the 8300 clause. If he learned his lesson and he goes to settlement and closure without any more terroristic, aggressive acts of warfare, then the court is looking at how are we going to set up the commercial paperwork and in what order to settle and close the account and get on with it and let this man go his way. It's all about commercial settlements. That's the name of the game. It has nothing to do with what he did. It has to do with the present, not the past, not the future. Reality is in the present. How does he act today when he's in court? If he's honorable, they will work on settlement and closure. If he keeps going to war, then they will keep moving it toward the final process where he will exchange a wooden yoke for an iron yoke because of his continued act of warfare. Scripture says if you rebel, if you go to war against your wooden yoke, you will get an iron yoke. The court is here to test whether or not you're going to be in a wood yoke or an iron yoke. That's all it's there for. The choice is yours. Okay? There was an interesting movie out this weekend called Out of Time. It has Denzel Washington in it as I believe a county sheriff or a police captain of a small Florida Keys town and community. What is very interesting about this is Denzel Washington's character is in the process of being divorced by his wife, who has moved to the big city and been promoted to the job of detective with a law enforcement organization in the big city. She claims she really didn't want to divorce Denzel Washington, but she had no future living in the small town trying to be a perfectionist at her job. There was no opening for her to be promoted into. So she went to the city for commercial gain. While they were at it, because of the separation of distance and some other factors, she decided to be divorced. She started that proceedings. Meanwhile, back in the little town, there happens to reappear a high school girlfriend of Denzel Washington that had been out of town, moved away for 12, 15 years, and now she was back in town, and they started seeing each other, even though this woman's husband was the type of person that appeared as though he beat her up for any cause and any reason whatsoever. And so, needless to say, she would call, quote, the police chief or the sheriff to come over and investigate things and protect her from her husband, which she really didn't want him to do, because if he interfered too much, her husband would be jealous and beat her up all that much more. So it was obvious she was just trying to get Denzel Washington there as an old-time friend and a possible substitute if she could ever get up enough nerve to leave her abusing husband. Well, the sheriff had just been involved in a big drug raid in the Keys in his venue and jurisdiction, and they had captured close to the better part of $1 million worth of drug money, which they had seized. And under the laws, the law enforcement agency that seized it kept control of it and put it in safekeeping until the trial, which in many times took months and even years. It turns out, as Denzel got more involved with this other woman, that he found out that she was dying of a reoccurring cancer and had only 6 months to 9 months to live. And then this woman that was dying, that Denzel found out had cancer, there was no known treatment except experimental treatments, way too expensive for her. And she finally confides in Denzel Washington that she's very suspicious of her husband, because it turns out that when she and her husband got married, they each took out a policy on each other for death of around $100,000. And now it appears that secretly her husband had upped her death policy to $1 million. And Denzel says to her, well, don't worry about it. If he just did that, he's not going to get a payoff anyway, because since you're terminally ill, the insurance company will find that out, knowing that he knew that when he took out the policy, and they'll never make a payoff. And she says, no, you don't understand. He upped that about a month ago before I went to the doctor and before the doctor told me I was terminal. So he will get paid off. And I don't trust him. He may be doing me in or whatever to get the money. So this woman tells Denzel Washington that within 30 days of a change in the policy, she can change the beneficiary, and she makes Denzel Washington the beneficiary of the $1 million without telling her husband. The plot thickens when Denzel decides that drug money was from an evil source, doing bad things to people. And if I can be of any help whatsoever, I want you to take the drug money and go for a special treatment in Europe, because they won't even come around looking for this money for several years as they petition and do everything for trial. We'll figure out what we're going to do. If there's any chance of saving you by using this money for good, I want you to have it. So he gives the money to her. Tells her to meet him that night at such and such a time, and he will make sure she gets on the plane for Europe so that she will be able to get her treatment. When she doesn't show up at the meeting that night, he goes to the house where she and her husband live. And he sees both cars for the husband and her in the driveway. It's past the meeting time. And he figures maybe the husband beat her up or something and she can't get out of the house. So he starts walking around the perimeter. He's not in his uniform. And a neighbor hears a commotion and starts yelling as though he is the problem. And he decides that rather than stick around and make the husband jealous and get in trouble with the wife even more, he better just get out of there and see if she won't leave the house later on. Within 7 hours, the house is on fire. Both cars are in the driveway. The local fire department is at the scene. When they put the fire out, there's 2 skeleton bodies inside the house. Forensic analysis shows by the dental records that it's the husband and wife. Now we have the husband and wife dead in the house, the money missing, presumed burnt up in the house. Our friend is not looking like he's in a very nice position. The fire department team keeps doing their forensic investigation, and within an hour have determined that the fire was not accidental, it was set. To which the scene is now an arson scene involving dual murder. The neighbor, of course, having seen our hero crawling around the house before it caught fire. Plus, the money's gone. Plus, the FBI in Miami called up and said, we need to get the money. He goes, no, you don't. Rules say I keep it. He said, I don't care what the rules say. We have reason to believe that the people that were involved in the drugs that you were dealing with were involved in several other dealings, And we have reason to believe that the money that you confiscated was marked bills that we gave them in a previous thing, and we want to connect them to two crimes, turn over the money to us. Now the pressure thickens. We're running out of time. Once the investigation takes on the scope of arson and murder, we need a murder investigator. Guess who happens to be in town? The guy's ex-wife, who is a detective investigating murders in the big city, and she gets assigned to the case to investigate the double murders down here in this little town in which there are no detectives to investigate murders. And it turns out that to look at the facts and the evidence will involve phone records from phone calls being made to and from the residence, which includes phone calls from the police chief's desk at the police station, not to mention from his cell phone. If they're looking for a motive and they find out the money is missing, they will also now find out that he has become the beneficiary on $1 million policy that she changed over, which gives him motive, opportunity, and everything else. And lo and behold, then further forensic investigation finds out that the two dead people in the house aren't the husband and wife at all. The two people that happened to be in the morgue that were substituted for the husband and the wife. So now the theory that there was a plot or a conspiracy to steal the money from the sheriff by fraud and deception comes into play. And our police chief here is now trying to locate where the girlfriend and her husband could have gotten to with the money. In the long run, the sheriff is trying to stay ahead of all of the various law enforcement investigators on the public side, trying to pin a crime on whoever it is that the evidence points to. And who does the evidence point to? Him, on the public side. He understands, being a law enforcement officer, that what he needs to do is he needs to do a private investigation of the private facts that have not been directed to the public to rebut the assumptions and presumptions that he is the one that's done all this nasty stuff. And he has to do it before his wife, the FBI, the rest of his police department, and anyone else catches on to what's happening. Now, in the long run, he has the assistance and help of his one and only best friend from the county.
Okay, we had a little problem. We lost some of the tape. For those that have counters, if you want to move forward to about 80 on the counter, you'll pick back up again. Sorry about the inconvenience.
He says, I couldn't help it. I suspected I knew what it was, and I was so excited. He says, you're going to be as excited as I am. And Denzel says, well, what is it? He says, it's a check for $1 million. The insurance policy on that woman. But that's when Denzel's Washington's wife walked up behind him on the boat and said, no, you can't take it. And the medical examiner goes, why? Because he was an arresting officer at the scene where she died. And the medical examiner goes, but he didn't kill her, you did. And she said, take it from me, he can't accept it. Well then, in a short conversation, Denzel finds his wife's coming home and not divorcing him. And it was like all of a sudden, get out of here, Mr. Medical Examiner, you and your $1 million check. I got my wife back. What is Hollywood telling you? First of all, isn't that whole movie a redemption story? Isn't it about a guy whose time is running out? He's in so many debts, so many transactions based on his own lies, his own activities, that he has no clue how he's juggling one thing against another. And it was only the honor in the background of trying to resolve it correctly that enabled him to move through there. And in the end result, there were only 3 people that understood what had gone on. There was the sheriff, the medical examiner, and the sheriff's wife. There was basically the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There was a redemption, and it didn't lead to the $1 million pot at the end of the rainbow. It was irrelevant and immaterial. And all the accounts got balanced on the public side. And it didn't deal with the money. Not for those people that were in the private. Hollywood is just incredible. Guy called me up here a couple of weeks ago and said, we got to stop writing checks on closed accounts. And I go, oh, really? He says, yep. He said, that isn't working. I go, well, let's see, we got asset funds, we got liability funds. He says, I know, but it's not working. I said, well, what is your context? When you write a check on a closed account and pass it in the public, they can't see it. The public doesn't understand that there are any assets. All they understand is liability. So if you write a check on a closed account to buy a car, a house, or anything else, what's the first problem that you've got? The beneficiary comes back and tells you this is no good. Is the beneficiary on the public or the private side? Public side. And so you try to use your exemption by way of a prepaid account and asset to discharge a liability. And when you put an asset in a liability, it's like adding a positive to a negative, which balances out to zero, which is a closure and a settlement. But as soon as you bring the positive there, the public can't see the positive. All they can see is negatives. So immediately, what does that create on the public side? An explosion, a warfare. So this guy observed that every time we try to use asset instruments, checks on closed accounts, bills of exchange, and pass them on the public side, all we get is a warfare. And then we keep coming back going, well, I'm just telling you, apply it, settle it, and close it. So we just keep coming back, ramming the asset right in their face, going, settle it, close it, adjust it, whatever. I took notice that isn't that exactly what the group of patriots are doing when we say, look, you can't fire an attorney. You can't go into court and try to argue pro se like you're on the asset side because they can't see you operating in that capacity. Theirs is the world of the dead. They don't see living things. They don't see real things. And if you try to go in there and you try to use any procedure or process from the real world as though we're still at common law, everything is still hunky-dory, in their world, it creates a warfare. It's a terrorist attack. So using an instrument drawn on a closed account is like a terrorist attack on their system. So the guy says to me, we got to cut that crap out. Not only is it not working, but it's going to a warfare against them in a different arena. So you're not arguing about the charge of the traffic ticket. You're not going to war saying, look, buddy, you can't prove I was speeding, as though that's the relevant issue. It's immaterial. But now you take the war to the settlement and say, I'm requesting you settle it with an asset instrument, which is too much reality for them, and now a warfare ensues over the methodology of adjusting the accounts. So you've just shifted the warfare from one field of battle to another field of battle. Remember, we started doing well when we started learning that. Instead of going into court and argue, what you do is you accept the appointment of an attorney, and you draft the attorney by private letter rogatory to go in and settle the public account by honoring and respecting these private negotiations on the private side, which is the duality of the court, which the guy complained about in that article that we read at the beginning of tonight's meeting. We can sit back from our perspective and see that that guy didn't understand there was a duality there, and you can't mix the public and the private. He tried to mix the public process of a FOIA request with the private records of the court, and the clerks and the judges are saying, doesn't compute, you can't get at them. Now, what we have to understand is there's nothing wrong with the concept of asset money and liability money. One's in the real world, one's in the liability or the fiction world. The fiction world is public and the asset world is private. But those two worlds have to stay apart. You can't move between them. If you move between them, a war breaks out. What was that movie? Gosh, it has to be 20 years old, where the little girl was sitting on the floor staring into the television set and got yanked into the TV set. Because the fiction world and the real world got mixed up. That's what's happening here. When those two worlds get mixed up, there's a free-for-all and all kinds of problems. So what the guy said is, look, he said, what we probably need to do is we need to keep the straw man's checking accounts open. And we need to be able to allow the straw man to write checks out of the open account with liability funds to be drafted to the beneficiaries in the commercial fiction world. Now, who operates the accounts? Isn't it the bankers? Just like in the courts, the operator of those accounts are the lawyers. Haven't we learned to accept a lawyer and move him from an attorney into a lawyer under private international law so that he can be the agent to go through the window between the real and the fiction? He can see the letter rogatory instructions in the real world on the private side. The court's got a dual record-keeping system. Didn't that guy just go at lengths to tell us that the federal court administrators acknowledge that there is a private set of records in those courts and that we can't reach that private set of records because that's what they are, private? That guy assumes and presumes that that private set of records was for what purpose? To be used against us, the living people, to screw us up. In reality, the private records will be the evidence of our honor to resolve the elements of the fictitious controversy to get the settlement. So the private records aren't there to destroy you if you're honorable. The private records are there to set the proceedings straight, to give the living soul a remedy. But if you're in dishonor and fight them, those private records will not give you the remedy. They will give them the reason to bring the execution against the living soul for his dishonor. Now, if the lawyers can be accepted, if you accept, doesn't that mean you're in control? And the creditor? So rather than go to the courts and fight everybody so that you're the debtor in the courts as the living man and get screwed, you accept the officials in the courts so that you're the creditor and ask them to play with all those accounts there and resolve them and get them straight. About 5-6 months ago, maybe even a little longer than that, when Victoria Joy out west was dealing with buying the home by way of the check on the closed account, remember that she was told by the seller that when the seller contacted the seller's bank, the seller's bank told the seller, who was the beneficiary of that check, that the beneficiary's bank did certain things with respect to the beneficiary, and that the drawer of the check had to do certain things with the drawer's bank, which was the drawee. Now, the presumption is that if there is an account opened with a bank through the straw man's name and account, that under the rules of the Federal Reserve System, isn't the straw man the customer of that bank? Yes. And under the Federal Reserve rules, as a customer of that bank, doesn't the bank have certain duties and obligations to the customer, i.e., if the bank is drafted by either the straw man or the secured party creditor behind the straw man, doesn't the bank have fiduciary and commercial requirements with regard to their customer pursuant to the Federal Reserve rules? You bet.